And you're indeed listening to 3CR Community Radio. And you're listening to Yarra Bicycle User Group Radio on Monday morning. And on the phone today, I have Matthew from the School of Medicine and Public Health, the University of Newcastle.
G'day, how are you?
Good. Now, you're actually a very vocal advocate of 30-kilometre speed limits in Australia. And last week, you were a co-author of an article in the Conversation about 5 myths around 30-kilometre speed limits in Australia.
That's right, yeah. We wrote an article busting 5 myths about 30-kilometre zones in Australia because we just seen that there's a little bit of misinformation floating around what 30 kilometres an hour speed limits can actually achieve. And, you know, we wanted to kind of outline the evidence showing how good 30-kilometre zones can be for Australia.
It's quite pertinent considering, I don't know what it's like where you're at the moment in Newcastle, but in Melbourne, our traffic is just horrific at the moment. And we're seeing more and more pushes to just allow the wash of traffic to, you know, continue unimpeded. And it's interesting that, you know, this article has, you know, come up. Plus, you know, was it United Nations had was it promotion last week for Love 30?
That's right. The United Nations campaign last week was a real success, and they talked about countries all over the world that are adopting 30-kilometre-an-hour speed limits. Touching on your point there about Newcastle and kind of how we're doing where I am, we're certainly not seeing the same levels of traffic as, say, a big city like Melbourne. Of course, Newcastle is quite a bit smaller. But what we are seeing is that our shopping streets, you know, we have a couple of main shopping streets, one of them being Beaumont Street that runs through our one of our bigger suburbs. That's chock-a-block with cars and chock-a-block with traffic. And it's not a particularly safe place to shop or a particularly attractive place to have a coffee and sit out on the curbside. And I know that you guys in Melbourne are really proud of your coffee culture and your laneways and streetways. And I think 30 kilometres an hour is one way for other cities to kind of pick up on that and try and build a bit of that slow culture and especially safe and attractive culture around some of the shops and cafes and bars and restaurants.
Because we've seen that with the last 12 months of rollouts of parklets and on street dining and the like. But with the move back to, like, you know, full steam recovery economy and all whatever, you know, thing I want to chuck into it, we've seen, like, people just get a predominance of using their cars because of an obvious fear of COVID. But we're in a really interesting predicament at the moment in the largest cities, and as you're just saying for Newcastle. Now, you know that you're saying in the article we've got 5 states and territories are trialling or planning 30-kilometre speed limits. And actually, what do you think these are urgent and necessary?
Well, they're urgent and necessary. The urgent bit there, definitely urgent for safety. And in terms of economic recovery, they're also urgent too, because we know, you know, like you were saying there, that it's things like parklets, it's things like 30-kilometre-an-hour speed limits that can help create the really enjoyable places to spend time in. And we in Newcastle haven't been as lucky as some of the other bigger cities in terms of trialling parklets. And that would be certainly something that we'd like to have a look at. But 30 kilometres an hour speed limit is kind of one of a suite of things, you know, parklets being another, or traffic calming like speed humps, that can kind of help create that livable atmosphere and make our towns and cities more pleasant places to be in. In terms of the safety bit, that we know that there's about 1,100 people a year that die on Australian roads, and a lot of these are in urban areas on streets with 50 kilometre an hour speed limits. So whilst, you know, we're talking about shopping streets, we're also talking about places where people live in terms of our suburbs and our local residential streets. And we're talking about school zones as well. We're talking about where our kids are getting to and from school. So there's kind of plenty of urban areas that are really well suited to 30 kilometres an hour. And it's great that I've seen lots of discussion over the last week in response to our article and the conversation around, you know, 30 kilometres an hour isn't just going to do it alone, and that's absolutely right. 30 kilometres an hour speed limits is just one ingredient in the, whole plethora of different ingredients that are needed. You can't make a cake with just flour. There's lots of other stuff that's needed. We've got pedestrian and driver education, which is important. Enforcement of speed limits, because we know that that helps, and that's something that can help reduce speed. There's different street design features. We know that Western Australia, for example, are trialling safe active streets, which are a fantastic thing. If you wanted to go and have a quick Google of those, they're a red street with blue markings that indicate safe active street, and there's all sorts of curvatures and cutouts in the street that help slow the traffic down. And you can really see the benefit for all road users, not just for cars, but also for people walking and cycling and rolling wheelchairs, because there's far less people needing to run along those streets because they're now safe active streets where people can just spend a little bit more time.
And a case in point, I know that New South Wales has minimum passing legislation for cyclists. We've just recently introduced it into Victoria. It'd actually make that legislation easier to be effective if people are passing each other at, predominantly motorised vehicles, passing riders at slower speeds.
That's right, yeah. And one very interesting thing about the enforcement of the slow passing is a paper from New South Wales recently in the last year or so, which looked at how many people were pinged for a close pass and how many were pinged for another driving-related offence. I think it was either being on the mobile phone or something like that. And you look at the comparison of how many people that are getting done for close passes, and it's very, very, very low. The enforcement of that is quite difficult. Of course, that really does help, and that is one of the ingredients in the cake. And we need to keep adding to the ingredients so that we do build a safer and more livable place to be in. Yeah.
So with the time we have, we just want to go through these 5 myths. And
sure.
Yeah, so like number 1 myth is they don't make a difference, and the fact is they do.
Well, they absolutely do, yeah. We know that the chance of survival when you get hit by a car goes from 60% chance of survival at 40 kilometres an hour to 90% at 30 kilometres an hour. So even in our kind of low speed zones already that are typically 40 kilometres an hour, we know that reducing it down to 30 can have that additional benefit. And of course, that's the impact speed rather than the speed limit, but we know that speed limits are one of those things that help reduce speed. So in terms of do they make a difference, they absolutely make a difference to safety, and they contribute to making a difference to livability as well.
Myth 2, they aren't popular with Australians.
This is a really interesting one in terms of there's different pieces of data out there. The piece of data that we used was from a nationally representative poll from the Heart Foundation, which found that 2/3 of Australians say they want lower speed limits on local streets. Now, there are a couple of different surveys that say slightly different things, though we know that over time, as these things are implemented, people's support for them around the world actually grows. So as people see that traffic reduces and places become more livable, its community support skyrockets. So it's one of those where sometimes you've got to get enough people to back it, and then following that, and it's following it actually being implemented, you see more and more people start to appreciate the benefits.
Myth number 3 is that they'll increase journey times, and that's something that's quite pertinent here in Melbourne because we have some quite long commuting distances for people to do, and also not just commuting to a job, their role is on the road. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, definitely. Most of the journey time is going to be in the car. You're not actually spending on 30 km/h speed limit streets. We're looking at residential streets here, we're looking at school zones, and we're looking at shopping streets in urban areas. So the majority of journeys aren't completed on those type of streets. There was a study here that we included within the article that found that the impact on a typical journey to work of about 25 minutes is less than a minute in terms of total journey length. And if that improves safety, if that's what is required, or one of the things that's required, I think that's a fantastic trade-off. A very small, negligible amount of time that can help improve the lives of people living in Australia and also save the lives of Australians.
Myth number 4, they are anti-motorist. And this is a rising clamour I've kind of been picking up in the last little while of, I need my car, I must be able to get around, you're trying to take away my my right to drive.
It's another interesting one.
Yeah.
I encourage people to go and have a look at the article for a bit more, but just one of the points that we made was that lower speed limits lead to fewer car crashes. So your insurance costs on your car are going to go down.
Yep.
The time you're delayed in traffic doesn't really change as per myth 3. But also you'll find that as streets are safer for people, and speed limits are one of those ingredients, that we'll find that more people will start shifting towards other modes of transport for short journeys. And that takes cars off the street. So that makes journeys in a car faster overall. So we know that speed limits is not the be-all and end-all in terms of time in traffic, and there's all sorts of things that impact on our journey times, and there's all sorts of things that make things anti-motorist. But this really isn't an anti-motorist policy. This is something that can help everybody on the streets.
And myth number 5, which is a big one because it's a common retort, which is it's just more for government fines.
Yeah, you see a lot of fun headlines in the press about this kind of stuff. As I was saying before, speed enforcement is something that works, and it is one of those ingredients that we need in order to make sure that speed limits are, kind of adhered to. Street design is another one of those ingredients. But I would just say that the government's also interested in saving some of those 1,100 Australian lives a year, and they're also interested in economic recovery and economic prosperity in the future. So we know that it can improve both of those things in the short term as well. These things can happen fairly quickly, and 30-kilometre-hour speed limits can happen fairly quickly if we can get our act into gear.
Yeah, because I know the city of Yarra have done measures around 30 kilometres, a recent, in the last couple of years, trial, and that's been enacted in certain parts of Yarra. And I know that city of Darwin are putting in 40-kilometre limits on some of the more residential areas. So it's happening, but it's not fast enough because they're saying leadership is needed to counter these myths about these speed limits. And also, as we're saying in the intro, it was the campaign last week's parts of Streets for Life, a campaign for Global Road Safety Week.
Yeah, and these trials are happening. Like you say, there's kind of 5 states and territories around Australia that are trialling them. Around the world, that's kind of how it started. A couple of states and territories in various countries have picked it up, and then the country has gone, actually, this is a great idea for the whole country, and we should make this a default urban speed limit for all streets. And that's what we've seen in the last week in the United Nations Road Safety Week campaign. We saw that Spain came out and said that they were going towards 30 kilometres an hour as a national thing, even though a lot of their cities had already picked it up. So it's nice to see that Australian cities are picking it up, and it's, I haven't been to Melbourne for a while, but it's great to see that, and hear that Melbourne are kind of picking bits of that up. And here in Newcastle, we have got one, which is exciting. As a regional town, we did, or as a regional city, we did pick up 30-kilometre an hour speed limit. It's just doing more of them, and more of them in the right places, around schools, around shopping streets, around where people live. And then from there, we can see the real impact on, all of those myths, and we can actually start to myth bust them in real life.
So, in closing, if people are interested in learning more about the benefits of 30-kilometre speed limits in residential areas, where would you direct them towards, Matthew?
Well, I'd send them towards a website, 30please.org, which is an Australian campaign, and I would encourage them to have a look around on that site. They can check out, our myth-busting article. They can check out last week's United Nations Road Safety Week campaign. And after having had a look at all of that, they may come across the 6 compelling co-benefits of 30 kilometres an hour, which include livability, air quality, equity, physical activity, and a couple of others. So I really would encourage people to go and have a look and see what 30 kilometres an hour speed limits can do for us.
Yeah, because I think earlier this year I had Lena Hutter, who does 30please.org, talking about the similar issues. With her, like as a parent, and what she sees and how she can, safely move her children and family. Yeah, it's a very interesting and also quite pertinent issue of, as you're saying, a suite of measures like separated facilities, parklets, long-term strategies and goals of making our shared areas more livable and healthier.
That's right.
Yeah.
And healthier, and that's the angle that I come at it from. My PhD is in health and physical activity specifically. And so I come at this from a physical activity angle, and that we know that making streets safer and more attractive for people actually makes them want to walk and cycle and roll on them more.
Yeah.
And they feel safer to do that, and they get out and they get a little bit more active. And they do take that little trip to the shops by foot rather than by car. So, yeah, that's the angle I come at it from. And so everybody kind of has a different benefit to take away from this, and or main benefit. And certainly for me, it's the physical activity side of things. But, some people come at it from the road safety or the air quality or the equity, because we know that not all of our street users are able to use cars to get around.
Yeah.
And it's kind of thinking of others on our street is a really important thing.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time today, Matthew. It's been really quite enlightening, and I implore people to look up more about the 30 campaigns like Love 30, 30 Please and the like.
Great. Thanks very much.